Hi, folks. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to our session. I want to be able to use this time today to talk a little bit about some of our observations in the generative AI space and talk about how you can also become a GenAIssance master. My name is Tony Tzeng. I'm the Chief Product Officer at OctoML. And before we get too much into the content, thought it would be fun to start with this image here that you can see on the screen. So this is an AI conference, and we are in the generative AI track. And so if you look at this picture, you might start asking, gosh, Tony, there's something about this woman that looks strangely familiar. Who is this person? Maybe it's the smile, maybe it's the way, the mysterious gaze in her eyes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is actually Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, or at least it would be Mona Lisa if she was imagined in 1960s on the Las Vegas Strip. And this is something that we built with an application that we call OctoShop, which is just a fun little demo application that you can come by our booth and play with. But we'll go a little bit more into what it takes to build an application like this as we get further into this talk. So let's start a little bit with who is OctoML and what is our mission. So our mission is pretty simple. It's to offer easy access to efficient compute to a broad set of users, and specifically application developers here, to be able to integrate their choice of open source or custom AI models into their applications. We want to be that abstraction layer that makes it very, very easy to have an endpoint that you can then just build on top of without worrying about the underlying hardware or software behind the scenes. We were founded 4 years ago in Seattle, Washington in 2019 by a group led by Luis Sezzi, who's actually a University of Washington professor, and a number of experts in machine learning compilation and machine learning systems optimization. These were the founders that were the creators of initiatives such as Apache TVM, XGBoost, and MLC LLM. Now that's a lot of letters. Most people are not necessarily going to know what that is. Suffice it to say, this gives people and companies the power to be able to move their models between different types of hardware profiles. So if you're out there wondering how you can get access to things like NVIDIA A100s or H100s, we have technology that makes it so that you don't necessarily have to use the latest and greatest. You can have some alternatives when it comes to compute. So we're here really to talk about generative AI and the GenAIssance. And to me, I'm always blown away by how much things have developed really in the last 12 months. If you think back to where we were less than a year ago, things like ChatGPT, OpenAI, diffusion models, these are not things that were broadly known. This is largely in the realm of academics and researchers. And yet today, I actually have a couple elementary school kids, and a couple weeks ago, my middle son actually came out and asked me if I knew anything about ChatGPT, which he heard about from his teacher at school, and if the things we were doing at OctoML related at all to ChatGPT. So generative AI is having a moment when elementary school kids and their teachers are apparently bringing the subject up in class. But let's think about this, right? Let's say you hear what's happening with generative AI, and you're curious to see if this is something that you can apply yourself. So let's take a look at an example application here. Suppose I want to create a simple application that allows my customers to go and customize sneaker designs. I think this would be a lot of fun, right? Write something, and we can design a sneaker auto-magically for you. Now, the problem is, let's think about this from a generative AI and a developer standpoint. What does it take to actually develop an application like this? All right, start thinking about this. Okay, so I need some sort of a model behind the scenes. Now, what am I going to use? Am I going to use Stable Diffusion? Which version of that am I going to use? Is that even going to meet my needs? Do I go with a closed source model instead? Do I need a language model in the middle to help improve the prompts and the quality? How do I put guardrails around this so I can make sure that whatever comes out in the app is aligned with my brand identity? How do I make sure I can customize it or tune it? How do I make sure that it actually is integrated into the application? So you do all this work just to get this into the application itself. And then the real work begins. Because now you have an application out there, and now what happens, let's say if there's a new version of that model that comes out? Do I upgrade? Do I not upgrade? What if I don't have a choice in that matter? Or what happens if I need to be able to manage some of the other assets related to this? Or what happens now if my app becomes very popular? And maybe initially it was fine. We didn't have that many inferences per hour. But what if this starts to go up? What if I have 1 million inferences a day that I need to scale to? 10 million, 100 million? Do I have the right hardware behind the scenes to be able to support the growth of my app? So these are all types of problems that really become highlighted in more of a generative AI use case that I might not have had to think about before. Oh, and by the way, I didn't even talk about costs. You might find at the end of this that suddenly your generative AI inferences that your models are running are an order of magnitude more expensive than what you're used to before. And these all require GPUs, by the way, which you can't get. So these are the types of problems that you might have to face if you were an app developer trying to work in this space. As we've observed this, we've also believed that AI is really best as a mixture or a cocktail of models. So you've probably heard about some of the different types of models available, be it open source or closed source models. We're not here to say that there's necessarily one that's better than the other. We believe that there's a time and place for each. And really, we believe that you're going to end up using a mixture of a number of these different models. Let's come back to one example here, the image I brought up right at the very beginning. I highlight this not because this is an application you should necessarily go out and build, but because it helps illustrate the type of complexity that comes out with this. Now, we've jokingly call our application OctoShop as a little bit of a play on Photoshop, and the premise is actually really, really simple. You take an input image, in our case, Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, and you apply a prompt against it. In this case, say, set this picture in 1960s on the Las Vegas Strip, and then you get this output. Right? So it seems pretty simple. In reality, if you peel back the cover, we actually have 3 different generative AI models running behind the scenes to make this application work. So first, when we take that input image of the Mona Lisa, we actually start with an image to text model. This takes the image and it translates it into text. In this case, we're using the clip interrogator. Then from there, we actually run that prompt through a large language model to enhance the prompt and improve the quality of the image that's actually generated in the next step. In our case, we used Llama 2, which is a model that came out recently from Facebook. And then finally, you actually have the image generation itself. And in our case, we take that prompt that's then outputted from Llama 2, and we input it into Stable Diffusion XL to go and generate this image. I'm not saying that this is necessarily how every single application is going to work, but I say this just because something that seems so seemingly simple can actually have a complex set of models powering it behind the scenes. So for us, we really believe that you need to have a really easy way to work with the models of your choice. And for us, we really believe that this means running, tuning, and scaling this to be able to meet your production application and make sure that whatever infrastructure you have set up can scale with the needs of your product as it grows. Our solution to this is a product that we call OctoAI. And this is a self-optimizing compute service that's really targeted for builders of AI applications. The idea here is pretty simple. We want to deliver the world-class infrastructure for you to be able to run, tune, and scale your models behind the scenes without you having to think about that. We want to be able to automatically choose the right hardware, software, and parameter set to be able to optimize for you without you having to go in and set up all your own environments and worrying about replicas and scaling everything up and down. We want you to then be able to just really focus on developing amazing customer experiences through your app itself. Now, one of the things we then do is to make it easy, we actually take a lot of the popular open source models that you hear about in the news cycles, and we actually make them available as serverless endpoints from our OctoAI service. And so if you want to go and try out one of these, you can actually go in to our service and very quickly set up an endpoint and then start to integrate that into your application. So let's say you're doing image generation. Well, we have things like Stable Diffusion, 1.5 and 2.1. We have Stable Diffusion XL, which came out fairly recently. We even have things like ControlNet, which a lot of advanced image generation developers are using to help control the quality of their image. Let's say you're in the large language model business. We have things like Llama, both the Llama 65B and a quantized version that fits on a smaller hardware footprint and is thus cheaper to operate, as well as things like Llama 2, and with more on the way. Or let's say you're working in the audio or the speech space. We have models like Whisper that's available as well. So the point is, we try to make as many of these open source models available to you that are in demand from the community and from the developer ecosystem, and we try to make it really easy for you to then use this as a part of your application. Now, when we look at what we've been hearing from our community as they've engaged with our service, what we've really seen is that image generation applications are really leading the pack in terms of the types of applications coming to market. And you can just see all the images and logos on this page, and you can see what I mean. Personally, I find this a lot of fun because I think there's a lot of really great use cases here. And it's really exciting to see the proliferation and the development of some of these types of applications. For example, we have AI art generators, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. But we also have things like logo generators, which can be a lot of fun, or things that I love, like there's this interior design one that allows you to start visualizing what a room looks like with different furniture in different places and potentially with different styles. Or some of the other logos that we have here on the side, companies like Storytime AI. As a parent with young kids, I love this. This allows us to go and create stories that your children can then read. Right? They can set the parameter, they can set the scene, they can determine the length of the story, even the language, and it can be a great way to get your kids to practice learning and reading by generating stories on the fly. Or if you're in retail, Booth.ai, what that allows you to do is actually upload images of specific apparel and then essentially set what you want the model to look like, and it can actually generate an image that you can then use for your ad copy. Or companies like Ad Creative, which does exactly like it sounds. If you're going to create advertisements for different types of social mediums, it can go ahead and create this automatically. My point is, there's so much proliferation of what can be done with image generation, and we're really seeing a lot of interest and growing development in this space, and it's a lot of fun to see. Now, one thing in common between all of these is, a lot of times they're using the same underlying foundational model, but they're applying them in different ways through the use of customization. And I love this because it really just highlights what customization can do for that image generation use case. If you look on the left, you can see what a standard Stable Diffusion version 1.5 model looks like when you run it against this prompt of a man riding a horse, right? Looks like a pretty interesting image. Now on the right, what you start to see is how different the look and feel of this can be when you start applying different types of checkpoints or LoRAs against this. The upper one is a checkpoint called diffusion brush, and you can see it looks vastly different from the Warframe LoRa from Civitai at the bottom. And again, the point is, there are thousands and thousands of these types of customizations that are available, that are created by the community, or you can create your own as well with fine tuning. And through this, you can really start to create your own flavor, your own brand identity, or your own vision of what your application can be. We've actually had a lot of fun with this as well. And so, at OctoML, we like to have fun with some different demo apps and play around with the technology. And so here are a couple of my particular favorites. If we look at the one with the pizza, believe it or not, this is actually a functional QR code. If you hold up your phone, you can scan this, and it'll actually take you to our web page. But what we did is we took your standard black and white QR code and turned it into something that looks like food. We call this QR Chef. Again, it's just an application of what you can do with this technology. I love dogs, and so the dog one is a lot of fun, and it's near and dear to my heart as well. It's actually one that we call the cartoonizer. It takes a standard image, and it turns into something that looks like it came out of a Pixar cartoon. And actually, if you come by our booth, we actually can run this for you and give you a little cartoon version of yourself and print it out on a little sticker if you want. We've got some other examples here as well. The yellow Prius taxi and my colleague Terry here. This is actually a fun one. We call this the DeLorean. So you can take an image and transport it at different points in time and imagine what it looks like. You got another flavor of that with the Mona Lisa example as well. So, from all of this, what have we really learned? As OctoML, from talking to our customers and our users, we've really learned that app builders in the image generation space need so much more than just efficient model performance. Our learning is that this is really becoming more of a machine learning systems problem as much as it is about the model itself. If you think about all the things we started talking about around run, tune, and scale, picking the right model, making sure that you've got the right checkpoints and LoRAs enabled so that you can tune them, but then also make sure you can switch that very quickly behind the scenes on the fly. You want to be able to manage that as well. We have a customer that has over 30 terabytes of community-created model-related assets and customizations that they need to be able to manage. And so how do you do that at scale? How do you make sure that you're balancing the cost and performance trade-offs with auto-scaling your infrastructure and making sure that you're minimizing the impacts on things like cold start? And we talked about how GPUs are not necessarily the easiest thing to come by these days. And so how do you enable a scenario where if you get a lot of demand and your demand spikes and you don't necessarily have sufficient A100s or H100s behind the scenes, do you have alternative hardware that you can use? And these are things that OctoML is able to help with. So, in summary, we've really been on this image generation journey where we started off by launching early access to the OctoAI service. And we started by actually having the market's fastest stable diffusion model, and that's what we started with. Again, you can see how our background in machine learning compilation and systems really comes together with the type of service offering that we can bring to bear. We then started working with some innovative early adopters of stable diffusion, like Civitai and Extropolis, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and helped them really power the experiences that they wanted to bring to their customers. And today, we've started doing quite a bit more to enable greater degrees of customization and also user-friendliness when it comes to playing around with some of the stable diffusion and image generation tools. And so we talked about some of the customers here, and I love these quotes because to me, it really highlights how we can help address some of the issues that are popping up for developers of image generation apps. So if you look at this quote from Justin from Civitai, they were really trying to build a forum that can be a great forum for creators to go and share their content. At the same time, they're a very small team. And so they didn't want to necessarily deal with all the back-end services. And so this is where we're able to partner with Justin and his team and make sure that he can bring his roadmap to fruition without having to worry about all the machine learning operations and infrastructure behind the scenes. Kalen and Extropolis built an app called the Diffusatron app, which is a very popular AI art generator mobile app. And this app was actually so popular that it was putting tremendous pressure on their back-end services. And so again, we were able to partner with Kalen and Extropolis to make sure that they had the back-end they needed that could scale with their growth and balance the right cost and performance profile. And finally, we've talked a lot about what we can do around the image generation space, but we're building vertical applications beyond that as well. So you think about some of the applications around speech or large language models or media generation all up. These are areas we're actually actively investing in, and we're excited to bring more offerings there soon to market. We talked about some of the open source models. The other thing we also offer as well is bring your own model capabilities as well. The point behind this is we really try to encapsulate all these capabilities behind our OctoAI service so that as a developer, you just have to worry about taking that endpoint and then bringing it into your application and then focused on creating a great experience for your users. There's a lot of areas we're investing in, but I'm not going to go into detail here. If you want to hear a little bit more about this, I'd say come on by our booth at 700. Come play with our demos. Come talk to the team. If you have ideas or suggestions, we're all ears. Thank you for sitting through my talk and bearing with us in the middle of this afternoon here.